He didn't come to save anyone. Jack walked into that building for one reason only: to collect a debt and disappear before midnight. That's how his life worked. Clean entries, cleaner exits, no witnesses, no attachments. Then a small hand grabbed his coat. He almost shook her off. Almost. The girl couldn't have been more than 5. Too thin. Backpack still on, like she'd been planning to run. Her fingers were trembling, but her voice didn't break when she looked up at him and whispered, "Mister, my mom isn't breathing." Jack had ordered men killed for less hesitation than the second that followed. Behind her, an apartment door stood half open. The air smelled wrong, metal and fear, the kind of smell that never belonged to accidents. Jack knew what waited inside before he stepped through the doorway. What he didn't know, what no one could have warned him about, was that walking into that room would cost him more than blood or money. It would expose the one weakness his enemies had been hunting for years. And this time, it was holding his hand. Jack knew something was wrong the moment the elevator refused to come down. The building was one of those forgotten concrete blocks pressed between newer towers, its hallway lights flickering like they were tired of pretending to work. This wasn't the kind of place that required his personal attention. A minor debt, a name barely worth remembering. Normally, he would have sent someone else. Tonight, he told himself it was convenience. The building was close to his route home. In truth, Jack Michelle had learned long ago that excuses often hid instincts he didn't want to name. He took the stairs. His footsteps were measured, quiet, controlled. Power lived in restraint. He was halfway down when he heard its soft, uneven steps behind him, too light to be a threat, too hesitant to belong here after dark. Jack slowed, then stopped. The sound stopped with him. When he turned, he didn't see fear at first. He saw calculation. A little girl stood 3 steps above him, her hair braided but messy, as if someone had tried to make her look neat in a hurry and failed. A backpack hung from her shoulders, almost too big for her small frame. The straps clenched in her fists like handles on a lifeboat. Her eyes were too old for her face. They searched him, not for danger, but for permission. Jack felt irritation flicker through him. Children complicated things. He opened his mouth to tell her to go back upstairs. She grabbed his coat. The contact was light, barely there, but it stopped him colder than a gun ever had. Her fingers trembled as if she were holding onto the last solid thing in a collapsing world. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply looked up at him and said, in a voice that should never have learned how to be this calm, "Mister, my mom isn't waking up." Jack had faced death dressed in far louder ways. Screams, blood, bargaining. This was worse, because it was quiet, because it was small. He followed her before he consciously decided to. The hallway smelled wrong, stale air mixed with something metallic and sour. Instinct sharpened inside him, the kind honed by years of violence he rarely allowed himself to remember. The apartment door was half open. Inside, a man stood pacing too quickly, speaking too fast, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds. Victor? That was the name on the file. A man who owed money. A man who now reeked of panic. "It's nothing," Victor said immediately, words tumbling over each other the moment he saw Jack. "She's just sleeping. She drinks sometimes. You know how it is. She'll wake up." Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. His gaze had already moved past Victor, locked onto the shape on the floor. Hannah lay on her side near the couch, her dark hair fanned across the thin carpet. Even without touching her, Jack knew. The stillness was wrong. The angle of her body was wrong. Violence left signatures. And this room was signed in full. Dried blood at the corner of her mouth, swelling along her cheekbone, bruises blooming where hands should never have been. Olivia, because that was her name. Jack would learn later, shook her head violently, tears spilling down her face as she whispered, "She's not sleeping." Victor laughed too quickly. "Kids exaggerate. She scares herself." Jack knelt. The world narrowed to a single point as he pressed his fingers to Hannah's neck. The pulse was there, faint and erratic, fluttering like a bird trapped in a closed fist. Alive. Barely. Jack's mind cataloged the damage with brutal efficiency. Head trauma, loss of consciousness, time bleeding away with every second wasted on lies. If he had arrived 5 minutes later, she would already be dead. That realization hit him harder than any threat ever had. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Victor froze. "What are you doing?" "Saving her life," Jack said, his voice clipped, precise, stripped of emotion because emotion would slow him down. He gave the address. He described Hannah's condition with the same calm accuracy he had once used to plan executions. Only this time, the goal was survival. Olivia hovered behind him, her small hands gripping the hem of his coat again. Jack didn't tell her to let go. Sirens cut through the night minutes later, harsh and urgent. Paramedics flooded the apartment, pushing Victor aside, lifting Hannah onto a stretcher. Olivia tried to follow, panic rising at last, her composure cracking as reality surged in. Jack scooped her up without thinking, the motion instinctive, protective. She fit against him too easily. Victor protested loudly, indignantly, but no one listened. Not the police, not Jack. As they moved into the hallway, Jack's phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it once, twice. On the third vibration, instinct won. He glanced down.
Boss, someone's been tracking you. You're not alone tonight. The message was from Roman, his second, his shadow, the man who knew when to worry. Jack lifted his gaze to the stairwell, to the dark corners and blind spots he'd memorized in a heartbeat. This was how it started. A distraction, a weakness exposed. His enemies had been waiting for one. He looked down at Hannah being rushed toward the ambulance, then at Olivia clutching his coat like it was the only thing anchoring her to the world. For the first time in a decade, Jack Michelle didn't calculate the cost of staying. He chose it. He followed the stretcher into the cold night, fully aware that whatever he was stepping into was no longer just a debt, no longer just a stranger's problem. Somewhere between the flicker of broken hallway lights and the echo of sirens, Jack crossed a line he could never uncross. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week.
The hospital swallowed them whole. Bright lights, sharp smells, hurried voices. Everything clashed violently with the silence Jack carried inside him as he walked beside the stretcher. Hannah disappeared behind double doors marked emergency only, leaving Olivia standing still in the corridor. Her fingers locked around Jack's sleeve as if letting go would make her mother vanish forever. Jack didn't tell her it would be okay. He had learned long ago that promises made too early were the cruelest kind. A nurse knelt in front of Olivia, speaking gently, asking questions Jack barely heard. Names, ages, medical history. Jack answered when Olivia couldn't, his voice steady, convincing, practiced. When the nurse asked if they were family, there was a fraction of a second where the truth hovered on his tongue. He let it fall away. "I'm with her," he said instead. It was enough. For now. They were led into a waiting area that felt deliberately designed to drain hope. Plastic chairs, old magazines, a television playing something cheerful and absurdly loud. Olivia climbed onto a chair and curled into herself, hugging her backpack. Jack sat beside her, his knees angled outward, his body unconsciously forming a barrier between her and the rest of the room. He noticed things he shouldn't have noticed: how she flinched every time someone raised their voice, how her eyes tracked every adult male who passed, how her shoulders relaxed only when she could feel his presence beside her. His phone vibrated again. Roman this time, calling, not texting. Jack didn't answer. The vibration stopped, then started again. A third time. Reluctantly, Jack rose and stepped a few feet away, keeping Olivia in his line of sight. "Talk," he said when he answered. "This isn't good," Roman said without preamble. "Word's spreading fast. Someone tipped off Mitchell's people. They think you're compromised." Jack leaned against the wall, eyes never leaving the waiting room. "Because I made a phone call?" "Because you stayed," Roman corrected quietly. "Because you walked into a hospital instead of out of a building. That's not like you." Jack said nothing. "There's talk," Roman continued. "Internal. They're watching to see what you do next. If this turns messy, they'll move." Jack ended the call without responding. When he returned, Olivia looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Are they going to hurt her?" she asked. The question struck deeper than it should have. Jack had survived interrogations, torture, betrayals. None of that had prepared him for the weight of that simple sentence. "They're doing everything they can," he said carefully. She nodded, accepting the answer not because it satisfied her, but because she had no choice. Time stretched, nurses passed, doctors came and went. The doors to the emergency room remained closed. Jack felt every minute like a ticking countdown he couldn't see. He had spent years controlling chaos. Here, he was powerless. Finally, a doctor approached. Jack stood before the man even spoke. The doctor's expression was professional, composed, but his eyes carried the gravity Jack recognized instantly. "She's alive," the doctor said. Olivia exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between relief and a sob. "But the head trauma is severe. We're monitoring swelling. The next few hours are critical. Will she wake up?" Olivia asked. The doctor hesitated. Jack noticed. Olivia noticed more. We hope so, the doctor said gently. Hope. Such a fragile currency. After the doctor left, Olivia didn't cry. She stared at the floor, her small fingers picking at the frayed strap of her backpack. Jack crouched in front of her, lowering himself to her level. He didn't touch her. He let her decide the distance. You did the right thing, he said. You were brave. She looked up at him then, eyes shining with unshed tears. If you hadn't come back, she would have died. The certainty in her voice unsettled him. She wasn't accusing him. She was stating a fact. Jack felt something tighten in his chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome. Police arrived soon after. Victor was brought in, still talking, still denying, still pretending outrage. Jack watched from across the room as officers separated him from Olivia. Victor tried to look at her. Jack stepped forward without thinking, placing himself squarely between them. Victor's gaze slid away, suddenly unsure. A social worker appeared, clipboard in hand. Child Protective Services? Jack recognized the shift immediately. This was where things stopped being temporary. Questions were asked. Notes were taken. Olivia clutched Jack's coat again, her grip stronger now, more desperate. We'll need to arrange temporary placement, the social worker said. Tone neutral, practiced. Until her mother's condition stabilizes. Olivia shook her head violently. I don't want to go, she whispered, panic rising at last. Please, Jack straightened. He met the social worker's gaze calmly. She stays with me tonight. The woman blinked. Sir, I don't think you understand. I understand exactly, Jack said, his voice low but unwavering. She's been through enough for one night. Run your checks. I'll cooperate. But she stays. There was a long pause, the kind where decisions were weighed not just by policy, but by instinct. Finally, the woman sighed. One night, she said, pending verification. Jack nodded once. He had won something small, temporary, fragile. As Olivia was led away to rest in a quiet room, Jack's phone buzzed again. A message this time, short and chilling. They know about the girl. Jack closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, gaze sharpening. Somewhere between the ambulance ride and the waiting room, this had stopped being about a debt, or even about Hannah alone. The truth had surfaced, and truth was dangerous in his world. And for the first time, that danger had a name, a face, and a small hand that refused to let go. Jack signed the temporary custody form with a pen that felt heavier than any weapon he had ever held. The social worker watched him closely, her expression neutral but alert, as if she were trying to decide whether he was a miracle or a mistake. Jack gave her nothing to read. Control was still his language, even here, especially here. When the paperwork was done, Olivia was officially his responsibility for the night, a single fragile sentence written in ink that could be erased by morning. The drive to his apartment was quiet. Olivia sat in the back seat, clutching her backpack like armor, eyes fixed on the city sliding past the window. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask who he was. She seemed to understand, instinctively, that answers were dangerous things. Jack checked the rearview mirror more times than necessary, not because of traffic. Because Roman had been right. Because someone always watched when Jack Michelle changed his patterns. His building rose from the street like a monument to power and isolation. Glass, steel, distance from everything human. Olivia hesitated at the entrance, her small fingers tightening around the straps of her bag. This is where you live, she asked softly. For now, Jack replied. The elevator worked here? Of course it did. As they rose, Olivia leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was finally wearing off. Jack noticed how small she looked beneath the polished lights, how out of place. When the doors opened, he led her into an apartment that had never known laughter. The space was immaculate, cold, untouched by life. Olivia stepped inside and stopped, overwhelmed. It's too big, she whispered. Jack almost smiled. Almost. He showed her the couch, offered water, placed her backpack beside her like a promise that nothing would be taken away. When he turned to step back, she reached for his hand, not tightly, just enough. Jack froze, then allowed it. The sensation unsettled him in ways he refused to examine too closely. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He sat in a chair across the room, jacket still on, watching the rise and fall of Olivia's chest as she slept curled into the corner of the sofa. He had stood guard over men worth millions. This felt heavier. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual arrogance. Inside, time moved differently. somewhere after midnight. His phone vibrated. Roman again. They're testing you, Roman said quietly. A shipment was delayed. A meeting forgotten. Nothing overt. Yet, they're waiting, Jack replied. Yes, to see if you blink. Jack looked at Olivia, dreaming restlessly, her brow furrowed even in sleep. They'll wait, he said, and ended the call. Morning came with a message from the hospital. Hannah had made it through the night, stable but unconscious. Jack drove Olivia back before she was fully awake. At the hospital, the air felt heavier than before. Olivia ran to the room when allowed, stopping short at the bedside. Hannah looked smaller beneath the machines, pale and fragile, her strength stolen by hands that had sworn to protect her. When Hannah opened her eyes, confusion flickered first, then fear. Her gaze locked onto Jack, standing a few steps back. Something hardened in her expression. Who is he? She whispered hoarsely. Olivia turned. He helped us, she said quickly. He didn't leave. Hannah's eyes never left Jack. Years of damage didn't disappear because of one good deed. Why, she asked him directly. Why would you help? Jack considered lying. It would have been easier. Because I was there, he said instead. It wasn't the answer Hannah wanted. She turned away, her trust fragile, fractured beyond repair. Jack accepted that without protest. Trust could not be forced. He had built an empire on fear. This was different. Later, in the hallway, CPS returned, this time with questions that cut deeper. Background checks, financial records, a polite warning about temporary arrangements. Jack listened, nodded, agreed. He knew the clock was ticking. He also knew what he could do to stop it. One call, one favor, a closed door, the system bending quietly out of his way. He didn't make the call. Roman noticed immediately. You could end this, he said later. Frustration sharp in his voice. Why are you letting them look at you? Because if I force it, Jack replied. She loses anyway. There was silence on the line. Roman understood more than he admitted. That afternoon, Hannah watched Jack from her hospital bed as he helped Olivia with a puzzle brought by a nurse. His movements were careful, his voice low, his patience unmistakable. It confused her. Men like him did not exist in her world. Men like Victor had taught her better. You don't have to do this, Hannah said quietly when Olivia was asleep again. She's not your responsibility. Jack met her gaze. I know. And yet Jack hesitated. The truth pressed against his ribs, uncomfortable and dangerous. Because leaving is easier, he said finally. And I'm tired of easy. Hannah studied him, searching for deception. She didn't find it. What she found unsettled her more. That night, as Jack stood by the hospital window, his phone buzzed once more. A single message. No sender. You've chosen the wrong weakness. Jack's reflection stared back at him in the glass. He didn't look away. He didn't flinch. For the first time, he wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting something far more dangerous. Someone he could lose. Morning light filtered through the hospital blinds in thin, colorless lines, settling across Hannah's bed like something fragile and temporary. She watched the dust move in that light, counting it, using it to steady herself. Pain pulsed behind her eyes with every breath, a dull reminder that waking up had not been a victory, only a continuation. When she turned her head slightly, she saw him again. Jack stood near the window, jacket draped over one arm, phone pressed to his ear. He looked out of place in a hospital room, too controlled, too composed, as if chaos did not apply to him. Hannah's body tensed instinctively. Men who looked like that had always meant danger, even when they smiled. She closed her eyes, willing him to leave. But he didn't. Jack ended the call and turned, immediately noticing the change in her breathing. You're awake, he said quietly. No relief, no triumph, just fact. Hannah didn't answer. Her gaze moved past him to where Olivia slept curled in a chair, her cheek pressed against the armrest, a blanket tangled around her small frame. The sight hurt in a way Hannah hadn't expected. She should have been the one sitting there all night. She should have been the one Olivia trusted enough to sleep near. You shouldn't be here, Hannah said at last. Her voice was rough, scraped raw by fear and exhaustion. She doesn't belong to you. Jack didn't move closer. He didn't defend himself. I know, he said. That answer unsettled her more than any argument could have. CPS returned later that morning, clipboards and calm voices in hand. Hannah watched from the bed as they spoke to Jack, watched the way he listened, nodded, accepted conditions without resistance. It didn't fit the image forming in her mind. Men who helped usually wanted control in return. Men who stayed always took something. When the social worker explained that Olivia's placement was still temporary, Hannah felt panic rise. "You can't take her away," she said, pushing herself upright despite the pain. "She's already lost enough." The social worker gave her a sympathetic look. "We're not taking her away," she said gently. "We're making sure she's safe." Hannah's gaze flicked to Jack. Safe? With him? Later. When Olivia woke and rushed to Hannah's side, Jack stepped back instinctively, giving them space. He watched as Hannah stroked her daughter's hair with trembling fingers, watched the way Olivia clung to her, as if afraid she might vanish again. Something twisted quietly in his chest. In the hallway, Roman's voice crackled through Jack's phone, tight with urgency. "Mitchell's men are moving," he said. "Not openly, but they're circling. They think you're distracted." "I am," Jack replied without hesitation. "That's the problem." Jack ended the call and leaned his forehead briefly against the cool wall. Distraction had always been fatal in his world, yet the thought of walking away now felt worse. That afternoon, Hannah finally spoke to him again. "I don't know who you are," she said, her tone guarded, "and I don't trust men who appear when everything is already broken." Jack met her gaze steadily. "You don't have to trust me." "Then why stay?" He considered the question carefully. "Because leaving would be easier," he said, echoing words he hadn't realized would matter to her. And easy usually means wrong. Hannah searched his face, expecting arrogance, expectation, something familiar. She found none. It frightened her. When night fell, Olivia fell asleep between hospital visits and whispered conversations. Jack sat outside the room, working quietly on his phone, issuing instructions that froze shipments, postponed meetings, dismantled routines he had spent years perfecting. Each decision sent ripples through his organization. Each delay whispered the same dangerous truth: Jack Michelle was choosing something else. The twist came just before midnight. A nurse approached Jack, her expression uneasy. "There's been a complication," she said. "Hannah's vitals spiked earlier. We're stabilizing her. But stress is making things worse. She needs calm, consistency." Jack understood immediately what wasn't being said. Stability meant predictability. It meant a life without shadows pressing in from every corner. CPS would return in the morning, and they wouldn't just be asking about Olivia anymore. Jack looked through the glass at Hannah lying pale and fragile under fluorescent light, at Olivia sleeping nearby, trusting a world that had already failed her once. Somewhere in the city, his enemies were waiting for him to break. Jack straightened, decisions settling into place with quiet certainty. If they were going to come for him, they would find him exactly where he stood, between a woman who didn't believe in him and a child who already did. By morning, the hospital felt different. Not quieter hospitals were never quiet, but heavier, as if the air itself had learned something dangerous overnight. Jack sensed it the moment he stepped out of the elevator, the subtle shift in movement, the way conversations paused half a second too long when he passed. Paranoia had kept him alive for years. Today, it sharpened into certainty. Someone had followed him here. Hannah slept fitfully, her breathing shallow but steady. The doctor spoke in careful phrases. Each one carrying the same unspoken warning: stress could undo everything. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, coloring in a book a nurse had given her, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. She looked up when Jack entered and smiled, small and bright, the kind of smile that didn't belong in places like this. That smile was the problem. Jack's phone buzzed. One message. No name. Children disappear every day. His jaw tightened, but his expression didn't change. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and crossed the room, kneeling beside Olivia. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I dreamed Mom was cooking pancakes again." Jack swallowed. "That's a good dream." Hannah watched them from the bed, unease flickering across her face. She had begun to notice the way Jack checked the room before speaking, the way his attention never fully rested. It wasn't fear. It was preparation. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly when Olivia stepped into the bathroom with a nurse. Jack hesitated. He could lie. He could protect her with silence. Instead, he chose something riskier. "People don't like it when I change my priorities," he said. Hannah frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means you and Olivia have become leverage." The word landed hard. Hannah's fingers curled into the sheets. "Then you need to leave," she said sharply. "Right now. Before they hurt her." Jack met her gaze. "That won't stop them." "Then why stay?" Her voice broke despite her effort to keep it steady. "You don't owe us anything." Jack didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the window, where the city stretched endlessly, indifferent and alive. "Because if I leave," he said at last. They'll come for her anyway. Quietly. Permanently. Hannah felt a chill spread through her chest. She believed him. Worse, she understood him. That afternoon, the first move came not against Jack directly, but against his empire. Roman called, his voice tight. 2 shipments intercepted, accounts frozen overseas. Someone's leaning on our partners. Let them, Jack said. There was a pause. You're bleeding money. I know. You've never let that happen. Jack's gaze returned to the hospital bed. I'm letting it happen now. Roman exhaled sharply. This isn't strategy. This is surrender. No, Jack said. This is bait. Roman understood then. You're drawing them out. Yes. But if they move first, they won't. Jack interrupted. Not while they think I'm distracted. Roman went quiet. And the girl Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. That evening, CPS returned. This time with more questions, more scrutiny. Hannah watched as Jack answered them calmly, transparently, offering documents, permissions, access. He didn't push back. He didn't intimidate. It unsettled everyone in the room. After they left, Hannah spoke without looking at him. You're letting them examine you. Yes. They'll find things, she said. Things that don't belong in a child's life. I know. Then why? Because if I force this, Jack said gently, she'll grow up knowing she was taken, not chosen. Hannah closed her eyes. The logic was brutal. The intention, unexpected. That night, Jack moved Olivia to a secure wing of the hospital under the guise of medical necessity. He doubled security, not men in suits, but ordinary faces, nurses and orderlies he trusted because they didn't know who he was. Power hidden was safer than power displayed. Still, danger found its way in. Just before midnight, Hannah woke to raised voices outside the room. Olivia clutched her hand, frightened. Jack stepped into the hallway, body coiled and ready. A man stood near the nurse's station, well-dressed, polite, completely out of place. He smiled when he saw Jack. Mr. Michelle, the man said softly. We should talk. Jack's eyes hardened. You shouldn't be here. And yet, the man replied, glancing toward the room. Here I am. The message was clear. They didn't need to touch Olivia to make their point. She was the hostage no one could see. Jack leaned in slightly, his voice low enough that only the man could hear. If you so much as breathe in her direction, he said, there will be nothing left of you for your mother to bury. The man smiled thinner. Then we understand each other. He left without another word. Jack returned to the room and found Hannah watching him. Fear and something else tangled in her expression. They're not going to stop, she said. No, Jack agreed. Olivia shifted in her sleep, murmuring her mother's name. Jack pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down, taking a position he hadn't taken in years. God, they think she's my weakness, he said quietly. Hannah looked at him, heart pounding. Isn't she? Jack didn't look away. Yes, that was the truth. And it was exactly why he intended to win. The decision arrived quietly. No gunshot moment, no dramatic phone call, just a line drawn in Jack's mind sometime before dawn. While the hospital slept and the city outside pretended it wasn't watching him bleed, CPS returned early, earlier than expected. 2 caseworkers this time, one older, measured, one younger, eyes sharp with the kind of idealism that could become cruelty if disappointed. Jack recognized the pattern immediately. This wasn't routine anymore. This was escalation. Hannah sat upright in bed, pale but alert. Olivia pressed against her side like an anchor. Jack stood across the room, hands relaxed at his sides, posture open. He had learned long ago that power could speak softly when it chose to. We've reviewed your file, the older caseworker said. There are inconsistencies. Jack nodded once. I expected that. You have access to resources most people don't. The younger one added. That raises concerns. About safety, Jack asked. About influence. Hannah's fingers tightened in the blanket. You can't take her, she said, voice shaking despite her effort to keep it steady. She needs stability. The older caseworker met her gaze with genuine sympathy, and stability means transparency. Jack inhaled slowly. This was the moment, the one Roman had warned him about, the moment when a single call could make this problem disappear. He could shut doors, reroute authority, bury questions under paperwork that never surfaced again. He had done worse for less. Instead, he spoke. I won't interfere, Jack said calmly. Run every check, Talk to anyone you need. I'll make myself available. The younger caseworker looked surprised. Hannah looked stunned. You're just agreeing? Hannah whispered once they were alone again. Yes, you could stop them, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a realization. Jack didn't deny it. And if I do, she'll always belong to a shadow. He replied. I won't make her grow up owing me. Hannah felt something fracture inside her. She had spent years believing that power only took. Watching Jack choose not to use it felt unfamiliar, terrifying, and strangely disarming. The verdict came faster than Jack expected. Olivia was to be moved temporarily into protective placement while Hannah recovered, and Jack's background was fully evaluated. A few days, maybe longer. The words landed like stones. Olivia didn't understand the logistics. She understood separation. You said you'd come back, she said quietly, standing in front of Jack with her backpack already on. The bag looked heavier than before, as if it carried every goodbye she had ever learned too young. Jack knelt in front of her, bringing himself eye to eye. He resisted every instinct screaming at him to lie, to promise things he could bend reality to deliver. I will come back, he said instead, no matter what. Her eyes searched his face with painful intensity. Even if they say no, especially then. She nodded slowly, as if filing the promise somewhere deep. Then she leaned forward and hugged him, arms small but fierce. Jack closed his eyes, just for a second. When she pulled away, he forced himself not to hold on. Watching her walk down the hallway was harder than facing any enemy. Hannah cried openly this time, guilt and fear twisting together. Jack stood still until the doors closed, until the space she occupied became empty. That night, Jack made the second choice. He called Roman. I'm stepping back, Jack said. There was silence on the line. Then, sharply, From everything that isn't clean? Roman understood immediately. That will cost you. I know. Mitchell will move. Let him. You're dismantling your own shield. Jack's gaze drifted to the hospital window, to the city that had once bowed so easily. I don't need a shield, he said. I need daylight. The next 24 hours sent shockwaves through the underground. Accounts were frozen by Jack's own hand. Shell companies dissolved. Properties quietly transferred to foundations and public-facing trusts. Lawyers panicked. Rivals circled. Allies questioned. Hannah watched it unfold from her bed. Pieces revealed slowly through conversations she overheard. Headlines she wasn't meant to read. You're destroying yourself, she said one evening, unable to keep the fear out of her voice. No, Jack replied. I'm choosing what survives. She studied him then, really looked at him, and saw exhaustion beneath the control, resolve beneath the danger. Why her? She asked softly. Why Olivia Jack didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. Because she asked me to stay, he said, and no one ever did. The twist came just before Hannah was discharged. A message reached Jack through channels he couldn't shut down. Mitchell himself this time. Walk away now. Leave the child. Keep the rest. Jack stared at the screen, pulse steady. He typed one line in response. No. That night, Hannah woke from a nightmare and found Jack sitting in the chair beside her bed. Jacket off, sleeves rolled up, completely unguarded. They'll come for you, she whispered. Yes, Jack said. And if they take everything, Jack looked at her, at the empty space where Olivia should have been, at the fragile peace he was trying to build with hands that had once only known destruction. Then I'll still have chosen right, for the first time. Hannah believed him, because the man who had let go of power had already claimed something far more dangerous. Hope. The city didn't erupt the way Jack's enemies expected it to. There were no public shootouts, no bodies left as warnings, no frantic scrambling for control. Instead, the underworld stalled, suspended in an uneasy quiet that felt more dangerous than chaos. Jack's withdrawal had created a vacuum, and everyone was afraid to be the first to step into it. Mitchell didn't share that fear. He chose daylight. The meeting request arrived through a channel that hadn't been used in years, formal and deliberate. A private restaurant overlooking the river, neutral ground, no weapons, no entourage. The kind of invitation meant to signal confidence or contempt. Roman argued against it. This is a trap, he said flatly. He wouldn't risk exposure unless he thought you were already finished. Jack adjusted his cufflinks, movements calm, precise. That's exactly why I'm going. You don't have backup. I don't need it. Roman watched him for a long moment, then nodded once. Then ended. Jack arrived alone. Mitchell was already seated. Silver hair immaculate, glass of untouched wine in front of him. He smiled as Jack approached, the expression polished by decades of survival. You look different, Mitchell said conversationally. Lighter, or maybe just stripped down. Jack didn't sit immediately. He studied the room, the exits, the reflections in the glass. When he finally took the chair opposite, his posture was relaxed, almost casual. You asked for daylight, he said. Speak. Mitchell chuckled softly. Straight to business. You always did lack patience. He leaned back. I'll be honest. You surprised us. Giving things up, letting people poke around your finances, that takes either courage or desperation. Which do you prefer? Jack asked. Mitchell's eyes flickered. I prefer outcomes. He placed a folder on the table and slid it forward. Walk away. Permanently. Leave the girl. Leave the woman. Take what's left of your empire and disappear. I'll make sure no one touches them. Jack didn't open the folder. You already tried to scare me. And it worked, Mitchell said smoothly. You're bleeding. Your people are nervous. You're vulnerable. Jack finally met his gaze fully. You misunderstand, he said quietly. I'm not vulnerable. I'm visible. Mitchell frowned. Just slightly, Jack continued, voice even. You've spent your life hiding behind layers of violence. I stepped into the light because it's the one place you can't follow without consequences. Mitchell laughed, but it rang hollow. You think the law protects you? No, Jack said. I think it limits you. He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Mitchell's smile vanished. You're making a mistake, he warned. That child will cost you everything. Jack leaned closer, just enough to make the air between them tense. She already cost me everything I was willing to lose. He left without waiting for a response. The retaliation came that night, not through violence, but through information. Anonymous tips flooded authorities. Old alliances resurfaced with new accusations. Media whispers grew louder. Jack watched it unfold from Hannah's apartment. Now quiet, her recovery slow but steady. She sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching him pace. They're trying to bury you, she said softly. They're trying to rush me, Jack replied. That's different. His phone rang, CPS, an update. Olivia was safe, confused, asking for him. Hannah's breath caught. Jack closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. I'll come, he said into the phone. The twist arrived as he hung up. A second call. Unknown number. Jack answered without hesitation. Your strategy is elegant, Mitchell's voice said. But incomplete. Jack didn't respond. You think stepping into the light saves you? Mitchell continued. It doesn't. It only reveals what you care about. A pause. Check the news. Jack turned on the television. A breaking report filled the screen. Investigators reopening cases connected to his former operations. Names, dates, faces, carefully curated, damaging enough to wound but not destroy. Mitchell was forcing a choice. Hannah stood slowly, fear sharpening her movements. What does he want now? Jack's jaw tightened. To see if I'll crawl back into the dark. Will you? Jack looked at her, at the woman who had learned to distrust power because it always demanded payment. No, he said. I'll finish this. He made the final call just before midnight. Not to Roman, not to lawyers. To an independent task force he had funded quietly for years. A contingency he had never expected to use against himself. He handed them everything: records, ledgers, names, a controlled burn. By morning, Mitchell was no longer confident. He was exposed. Hannah read the headlines in stunned silence. You turned yourself in, she whispered. Jack shook his head. I turned him in with me. The cost was immediate. Arrests followed. Assets seized. The empire Jack built began to collapse publicly, spectacularly. But Olivia was brought back that afternoon. She ran into Jack's arms, crying, laughing, clinging like she feared the ground might disappear again. Jack held her, unashamed, unconcerned with who saw. Mitchell's final message arrived that evening. You've destroyed us both. Jack looked at Olivia asleep against his chest, at Hannah watching them with tears in her eyes. He typed his reply calmly. No.
I chose what survives. Outside, the city roared on, indifferent as ever. But somewhere between exposure and surrender, Jack had crossed another line. This time, not into darkness, but into truth. The quiet that followed the collapse was not peaceful. It was the kind of stillness that came after something massive had fallen, when the dust hadn't settled yet and no one knew what would be left standing. Jack felt it in the way the city looked at him now, not with fear, not with loyalty, but with curiosity sharpened by scandal. The empire that once moved silently beneath the streets had been dragged into the open, dismantled piece by piece under fluorescent lights and legal language. Hannah watched it all from a distance she didn't trust. She had been discharged 2 days earlier, her body healing faster than her sense of safety. Jack brought her and Olivia to a temporary apartment far from his old territories. Modest, anonymous, chosen precisely because it held no memory of power. Olivia adjusted quickly, as children often did, filling the space with drawings and questions and tentative laughter. Hannah did not. She watched Jack constantly now, not because she feared him, but because she needed to understand him. The man who made tea in the morning and cut fruit too carefully. The man who sat on the floor to help Olivia with homework. The man whose name still dominated headlines tied to words like crime, exposure, investigation. 2 truths existed at once, and Hannah couldn't reconcile them. The fracture came late one evening. Olivia had fallen asleep on the couch, her head resting against Jack's shoulder, trusting and unguarded. Hannah stood in the doorway, watching the rise and fall of her daughter's chest, the way Jack hadn't moved in over an hour, so he wouldn't wake her. Something in Hannah finally gave way, not to anger, but to fear sharpened into clarity. "You need to tell me everything," she said quietly. Jack didn't pretend not to understand.
He gently shifted Olivia onto a pillow, covering her with a blanket before standing. He followed Hannah into the kitchen, the space between them charged with things unsaid. The city lights spilled through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. "What do you want to know?" Jack asked. "All of it," Hannah replied. "Not the version you give lawyers, not the one you give her." Her voice trembled despite her control. "The truth," Jack nodded slowly. There was no hesitation now. "I won't lie to you," he said. And he didn't. He told her about the beginning, how violence had once been survival, how power had grown from fear and necessity until it no longer felt optional. He spoke of deals made in silence, of lines crossed and never uncrossed. He didn't glorify it. He didn't soften it. Every word landed heavy, deliberate. Hannah listened without interrupting, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. When he finished, the room felt smaller. "You're dangerous," she said finally. "Yes," Jack replied. "And you brought that danger to my child." Jack met her gaze steadily. "I brought it away from her," he said. "From a man who would have killed her slowly." Hannah's breath caught. She looked away. Fighting tears she refused to let fall. "You don't get to decide what's better," she whispered. "You don't get to choose for us." "No," Jack agreed. "I don't." Silence stretched between them, fragile and painful. "What happens when they finish tearing you apart?" Hannah asked. "When the investigations end and the protection disappears." "Then I live with what's left," Jack said. "If you'll let me." The question hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Hannah didn't answer that night. The twist came the following morning, delivered not by headlines, but by a knock at the door. CPS stood on the threshold again, this time with final documents. Olivia clung to Hannah's hand, eyes wide. The evaluation was complete. Hannah had been cleared. Custody would return fully to her. Jack felt relief first pure, unfiltered. Then something colder followed, because the same papers made something else clear. Jack had no legal place in Olivia's life. He wasn't a guardian. He wasn't family. He was a man who had helped and then stepped aside. Olivia sensed the shift immediately. "Are you going to leave now?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Jack knelt in front of her. He chose his words carefully. "That depends on your mom," he said honestly. Hannah closed her eyes. She had spent years teaching herself not to depend on anyone. Trust had always come with pain. But when she looked at her daughter alive, safer than she had ever been, she couldn't deny the truth any longer. "You don't get to disappear," Hannah said quietly. Jack looked up, startled. "You don't get to decide this alone," she continued. "You made choices that saved us. That doesn't vanish because it's inconvenient." Her voice softened, but didn't break. "But if you stay, it won't be on your terms." Jack stood slowly. "What terms?" "No lies," Hannah said. "No shadows brought into our home. And no pretending you can protect us by controlling everything." Jack nodded once. Agreed. That evening, as Olivia fell asleep between them during a movie she barely watched, Hannah felt something unfamiliar settle into her chest. Not certainty, not safety, possibility. The truth hadn't destroyed them. It had stripped away the last illusion, and in its place, something fragile and dangerous had begun to form, not built on fear or power, but on a choice made every day to stay, even when staying was the hardest thing of all. The danger didn't vanish just because the truth had been spoken. It changed shape, Jack woke before dawn out of habit, the kind that never truly left the body. The apartment was quiet, wrapped in the soft, unfamiliar stillness of a place where no one was planning an escape. He stood by the window, watching the city wake slowly, and realized something unsettling for the first time in his adult life. He didn't know what he was supposed to do next. The empire was gone. The enemies were exposed or scattered. What remained was uncertainty and two people sleeping down the hall who had become the axis of his world. Hannah felt the shift too. She moved through the days cautiously, aware that peace was something that could be taken if she trusted it too quickly. Jack respected that. He didn't push. He didn't hover. He learned to exist beside her without demanding anything in return. They shared quiet routines, morning coffee, school drop-offs, doctor's appointments, small acts that felt strangely intimate because they were ordinary. Olivia thrived. She laughed more easily now, her fear loosening its grip in increments. She started sleeping through the night. She talked about school and friends and future plans with the unfiltered optimism only children possessed. She talked about Jack too casually, confidently, as if his presence was already permanent. That assumption terrified Hannah more than any headline ever had. The test came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Hannah received a call from a legal aid office assisting victims of domestic violence. They offered a long-term relocation program. New city, new identity, protection, a clean slate, everything Hannah had once prayed for. She didn't tell Jack right away. That night, she watched him help Olivia with homework, his patience unforced, his attention absolute. The man who once commanded fear now struggled with elementary math problems and smiled when Olivia corrected him. The contrast made her chest ache. When she finally told him, she expected resistance, arguments, strategy. Jack surprised her again. "You should take it," he said after a long pause. Hannah stared at him. "Just like that?" "Yes, you'd let us go," Jack nodded slowly, "if that's what keeps you safe." The words cut deeper than any plea could have. Olivia overheard them. "Go where?" she asked, confusion clouding her face. Hannah knelt beside her. "Somewhere new," she said gently. Olivia looked between them, panic rising. "Will Jack come?" Jack crouched down in front of her, heart heavy. "That's not my choice," he said honestly. The silence that followed was unbearable. The twist came the next morning. Hannah met with the program coordinator and listened as the details unfolded restrictions. Secrecy, distance. She imagined a life without looking over her shoulder. She imagined Olivia growing up unafraid. Then she imagined that life without Jack. For the first time, she allowed herself to admit the truth she had been circling for days. Running wasn't safety. It was just another kind of fear. She declined the offer. When she told Jack, his control finally cracked. Relief flashed across his face before he could stop it. "You don't owe me that," he said quietly. "I know," Hannah replied. "That's why it matters." The final threat arrived not with violence, but with temptation. A representative from an international firm contacted Jack clean money, legal operations, anonymity. They wanted his skills, his mind, his past left buried. All he had to do was disappear. Jack considered it carefully. A fresh start had always been a fantasy. Now it was a choice. He turned it down. Instead, he began transferring what remained of his legitimate assets into long-term foundations education, victim support, rehabilitation. He didn't seek redemption. He sought responsibility. The city responded slowly, then grudgingly. Headlines softened, investigations closed, not because he was forgiven, but because he had stopped running. One evening, as Olivia slept, Hannah stood beside Jack on the balcony. The city lights reflected in the glass, distant and subdued. "You could have left," she said. "So could you," Jack replied. Hannah took his hand not out of fear, not out of gratitude, but because she wanted to. Jack's fingers tightened around hers, careful and reverent, as if the moment itself might break if handled too roughly. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous than chaos, a future built not on power or escape, but on choice. And neither of them knew yet how much that choice would ask of them. The quiet didn't arrive all at once. It crept in gradually, slipping into the spaces where fear used to live, settling gently instead of demanding surrender. Jack noticed it in the mornings, first in the way he no longer woke expecting alarms, threats, or unfinished business waiting to drag him back into the dark. He still woke early, habit refusing to die. But now the silence felt earned rather than dangerous. Hannah noticed it too. Healing, she learned, wasn't a straight line. Some days her body felt strong enough to forget what it had endured. Other days, memory returned without warning, sharp and uninvited. But those days passed more easily now. She wasn't alone when they came. Jack never asked her to be braver than she was. He stayed close without crowding, present without control, learning restraint in a way power had never taught him. Olivia thrived in the space between them. She had begun to call their apartment home without hesitation, the words slipping naturally into conversation, as if it had always belonged there. She decorated the refrigerator with drawing stick figures, holding hands beneath bright suns, and announced confidently that Jack was family, daring anyone to contradict her. Jack didn't. Hannah didn't either. The city adjusted. Investigations closed quietly. Names that once carried weight faded from headlines. Jack remained under watch, but the scrutiny softened as months passed without incident. He wasn't absolved. He wasn't celebrated. He existed in a gray space the world rarely understood, but for the first time. That was enough. Jack took on work that didn't require fear. Consulting, financial restructuring, projects that built instead of destroyed. It felt unfamiliar at first, like learning a new language with an old accent. But purpose slowly replaced adrenaline. He came home tired in a way that didn't hollow him out. One evening, months later, Hannah watched him from the kitchen as he helped Olivia practice reading. He listened intently, correcting gently, praising often. The man who once commanded rooms now celebrated syllables. The contrast no longer frightened her. After Olivia fell asleep, Hannah stepped onto the balcony. Jack joined her without a word, handing her a mug of tea he had remembered she preferred warm, not hot. The city stretched before them, quieter now, or perhaps they had simply learned how to hear it differently. "I used to think peace was something fragile," Hannah said softly, "like it would shatter if I trusted it." Jack leaned against the railing. "I used to think it was weakness." She smiled faintly. "We were both wrong." They stood there, hands brushing, neither pulling away. Jack turned to her then, hesitation flickering across his face, something she hadn't seen in him before. "I don't know what I'm supposed to ask," he said. "I don't know how this is meant to work." Hannah faced him fully. "Then don't ask," she said. "Stay." The word carried weight. Not a promise of perfection, not a demand for forever, just a choice, renewed each day. Jack nodded once, emotion tightening his throat. "I'm not going anywhere." The following spring, they moved again, not to escape, but to grow. A small house on the edge of the city, modest and sunlit, chosen together. Olivia claimed the room with the biggest window. Hannah planted flowers she never expected to care about. Jack built a fence he didn't technically need, simply because it felt right to protect something visible. The past didn't disappear. Sometimes Jack woke from dreams he didn't share. Sometimes Hannah flinched at raised voices, even laughter. But they learned how to hold space for each other's scars without trying to erase them. Love, they discovered, wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about refusing to look away. One quiet afternoon, as Olivia played in the yard, Hannah found Jack standing near the doorway, watching her with a softness that still caught her off guard. "She deserves more than what we give her," Hannah said gently. Jack shook his head. "She deserves honesty, stability, people who choose her." He looked at Hannah then, his voice steady. "She has that." So did Hannah. The moment didn't come with grand declarations or dramatic gestures. It arrived one evening as they cleaned up after dinner, hands brushing over the sink, laughter shared over something trivial. Jack reached for Hannah without thinking. She didn't pull away. The world didn't end. Instead, it settled. In the quiet that followed, Jack understood something he had never allowed himself to believe. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was a way of living. A series of small, deliberate choices made when no one was watching. And for the first time, those choices weren't about survival. They were about love. Not the kind written in headlines or whispered in fear, but the kind built slowly, patiently, in the light. The kind that stayed